The Hall of Concordance had been built to make small things feel smaller. That was the first thing Maya Renner understood as the great iris doors peeled open and the vaulted chamber swallowed her whole. The ceiling arched so far above her that clouds, actual clouds, seeded and maintained by climate engines older than her homeworld's written language, drifted lazily between the ribs of alloy and living crystal. The floor was a single unbroken disk of black stone polished to a mirror, so that when she walked, a second Maya walked beneath her, upside down, following her into the dark. She was 19 years old. She was the only human in the room. There were 406 delegates seated in the tiered galleries that ringed the chamber like the inside of a colossal throat, and not one of them had come to welcome her. They had come to watch. Word travels, in the great networks that bind the conquered of 7,000 worlds, and the word this cycle had been simple and delicious. The newest applicant species had sent a child, not a warfleet, not a tribute barge heavy with ore and treaty metals. Not even a proper diplomat with the gray hair and the slow, careful eyes that the older species respected. A child, a cadet barely graduated, with a scuffed satchel and a uniform that didn't fit quite right at the shoulders. Maya walked to the center of the disk, to the small raised plinth where petitioners were meant to stand, and she set her satchel down at her feet, and she looked up at the 406 faces arrayed above her, and she waited. The silence had a texture. She could feel it pressing against her skin like water at depth. At the highest tier, upon a bench of pale gold, sat the Council of Concordance itself, the 9 who spoke for the 7,000. Maya had studied their images on the long crossing out from Earth system, 311 days folded in the belly of a courier ship, learning their names and their titles and the small deadly courtesies of their kind. She knew them now the way you know the faces of people who will decide whether you live. At the center of the 9 sat High Arbiter Velsoon of the Asuway, a being of pale segmented chitin and long patient limbs, whose species had held a seat on this council for 11,000 years without interruption. Velsoon's eyes were a cluster of black hemispheres, and when they fixed on Maya, she felt the full weight of 11,000 years of not being impressed. "The applicant will state her species and her purpose," said Velsoon. The words arrived in Maya's ear a half-second behind the movement of the arbiter's mouthparts, translated by the bead lodged behind her jaw. The voice the translator gave the arbiter was dry and smooth, like a stone worn round by a river. Briefly, "The council's time is not infinite, though your journey to waste it may have felt so." A ripple of amusement moved through the galleries. It was not loud. These were not creatures who laughed with their throats, but Maya saw it, the slight rocking of the Thren delegation, the flutter of light across the skin of the Iller, the way the whole vast room shifted infinitesimally toward pleasure, the way a field of grass leans into wind. They wanted her to be afraid. Some of them, she thought, wanted it very badly. "My name is Maya Renner," she said. Her voice did not shake, and she was quietly, fiercely glad of that. "I speak for humanity, for the world called Earth and the 11 colonies that have grown from it. I have come to petition for our recognition as a conquered species, with all the rights of trade, transit, and protection that recognition confers." "Recognition," repeated Velsoon, and let the word hang there like something distasteful found on the sole of a shoe. "You understand what recognition is, child?" "I do." "Tell the council, then, in your own words, so that we may know whether Earth understood the magnitude of what it asked before it sent." The arbiter's limbs made a small gesture that encompassed all of her, her youth, her ill-fitting coat, her single satchel, before it sent this. "Do not rise to it," Maya told herself. The old diplomat who had trained her, a woman named Okonkwo with a voice like gravel and a patience she had spent 40 years learning, had told her this again and again in the months before the crossing. "They will insult you to see if you will bleed. An insult is a question. It asks, what are you made of? Give them the wrong answer and you give them power over you forever. Give them silence and they learn nothing." "Recognition," Maya said, means that the conquered acknowledges humanity as a people and not a resource. It means our worlds cannot be claimed by prior right of survey. It means our ships may pass the Weald without tariff of flesh or fleet. It means that when a human is wronged beyond the conquered's border, there is a law that was wronged with them. She paused. It means we stop being alone. Poetic, said a voice from the second tier, and the gallery stirred. The speaker was Delegate Asanth of the Thren Compact, a tall being sheathed in a shifting envelope of gold and violet mist, whose people controlled a third of the trade lanes in the Corward reaches. Asanth's kind did not have faces so much as they had presences, and the presence that turned toward Maya now was warm and smiling and utterly without kindness. It is always poetic when the small ones ask. They rehearse it on the crossing. They polish the words like stones, and then they stand where you stand, little Renner, and they discover that the conquered does not recognize poetry. The conquered recognizes weight. Wait, Maya said. Wait. Asanth drifted a half-meter down the tier, an act of theater coming closer as if to a specimen. How many worlds does Earth command? 12, counting the homeworld. A sound moved through the room, that leaning into wind sound again, the pleasure of the crowd. 12, Asanth said gently. The Thren Compact commands 900. The Asue whom the High Arbiter serves holds silent claim to a stretch of the Corward Dark you could not cross in 100 of your short lifetimes. And you come here, a child, forgive me, a genuine child. I can see the softness of your years on your face. You come here with your 12 worlds and your satchel and your rehearsed poetry, and you ask the 7,000 to make room for you at the table. The presence brightened, amused. Do you know what we call species like yours in the private rooms where the recording crystals are switched off? We call you the hopeful. It is not a compliment. The hopeful come and go. They petition, they weep, they promise, and then their little empires fold or fracture or are quietly absorbed, and we forget their names within a generation. You will be forgotten too, Maya Renner. The only question that interests me is whether you will be forgotten quickly or slowly. Maya stood very still and let it wash over her. She had known, coming in, that it would be like this. Okonkwo had warned her. The conquered did not admit species out of generosity. It admitted them out of calculation, when the cost of keeping them out grew larger than the cost of letting them in. And Earth, by every measure the conquered respected, was small. 12 worlds. A population you could lose in the rounding error of a single Thren census. A fleet that, if you gathered every warship humanity had ever built and set them all in a line, would not have stretched across the width of this single hall. By weight they were nothing. And so they had sent her, not because she was weighty, but because she was not. Because a gray-haired diplomat with a heavy tread would have made the same doomed argument and lost the same way, and Earth had decided, in the long, desperate councils that had preceded this journey, to try something else. To try her. May I ask a question of the council? Maya said. Velsoon's black eyes glittered. You may ask. Whether you receive answer is a separate matter. When the Asue were recognized, Maya said, 11,000 years ago, how many worlds did they command? A stillness came over the highest tier. It was very slight, but Maya had spent 311 days learning to read these people, and she saw it, the smallest hitch in the Arbiter's patient limbs. That is not relevant, said Velsoon. I think it might be, Maya said mildly, because when I read the Conquered's own records, the ones in the public archive, the ones anyone may access, it said the Asue were recognized when they held one world. A single world, ringed by a single ragged fleet, at the edge of a dark that the Conquered of that age had barely mapped. And the record says the council of that cycle mocked them too. It says the delegate who spoke for the Asue was young, younger than me. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It had gone brittle. You have read our archives, Asanth said, and the warmth had cooled a few degrees. How industrious. I read everything, Maya said. It was a long crossing. Then you will have read, Velsoon said, recovering, the dry river voice smoothing itself, that the Asue of that age brought something to this hall that Earth does not possess. They brought leverage, a thing the conquered needed, a thing the conquered could not simply take. That is the currency of this room, child, not history, not poetry, not the sad, clever trick of quoting our records back to us. Leverage. And you, the limbs spread again, taking in her smallness, her youth, the satchel at her feet, have none. He let that settle. You have come 300 days, Velsoon continued, almost gently now, the way one might speak to a creature one was about to put down, to stand in a room full of powers that could unmake your 12 worlds in an afternoon, and you have brought us a history lesson and a rehearsed speech. There is no shame in it. It is what the hopeful do. But let us not pretend, you and I, that this ends any way but one. The council will hear your petition because the forms require it. And the council will deny your petition because the weight requires it. And you will go home, Maya Renner, to your 12 small worlds, and you will tell your people that you tried. He leaned back into the pale gold of his bench. You may proceed with your formal petition. Take what time the forms allow. We will listen. A pause precisely waited, as one listens to rain. The galleries rocked with that soft, leaning pleasure again. Maya Renner stood on the black disk at the bottom of the great throat of a room, 406 powers arrayed above her, and she did not proceed with her formal petition. Instead she bent, and she opened her satchel. To understand what Maya did next, and why it mattered, you have to understand what humanity had figured out. The thing that no other species in the 7,000 worlds had ever quite managed to figure out, because they had all been too large, too old, too heavy to need it. Humanity had spent its entire history being the small thing in the room. Every human institution, every human triumph, every human survival had come from the same source, the certainty that they were outmatched, and the refusal to accept what outmatched was supposed to mean. They had faced ice ages with sharpened sticks. They had faced empires with pamphlets. They had faced plagues that killed 1 in 3, and had come out the other side counting, cataloging, building the machinery that would kill the next plague before it started. They were a species that had been told, over and over, across 10,000 years and 1,000 hard winters, that the thing in front of them was too big to beat. And they had developed in response a very particular kind of mind, a mind that did not ask how big is the enemy, a mind that asked instead, where does the big thing keep its weight and can I move it? The conquered had never learned this. The conquered had never had to. Every species that sat in the Hall of Concordance had risen to power by being large, by outbreeding, outbuilding, outlasting their rivals until they were simply too vast to challenge. Their entire civilization was a monument to weight. It was the only kind of power they understood, and because it was the only kind they understood, it was the only kind they defended against. They had guarded every door a heavy thing could come through. They had left the small doors open. Maya had spent 311 days finding the small doors. From the satchel she drew a single object, a flat black tablet, unremarkable, the kind of data slate a junior clerk might carry. She held it up so the galleries could see it, and then she set it on the plinth before her. High Arbiter, she said, Delegate Asenth, members of the council, you've told me I have no leverage. And by your definition of the word worlds, ships, tribute metals, the weight you can put on a scale, you're right. I have none of that, I never claimed to. She rested one hand flat on the black tablet. So I'd like to talk about something else. I'd like to talk about the wield. The room's temperature changed. It was not a physical change, but Maya, who had learned to read this room, felt it move through the tiers like a cold front, a sudden, wary sharpening of 406 kinds of attention. The soft leaning pleasure was gone. In its place was something she had not felt from them before. Interest. The wield is not a matter for a recognition petition, Vel soon said, and the dryness in the river voice had a new edge under it. The wield is a council concern. A closed concern. I know, Maya said. That's exactly why I want to talk about it. She let her hand rest on the tablet, and she began. The Weald, Maya said, is the great dark band that separates the coreward reaches from the outer worlds. Every ship that moves between the two halves of your civilization has to cross it. Nothing lives there. No stars, no worlds, just 3,000 light years of empty dust and the old wreck fields where the first crossings went wrong. It's the throat of the conquered. Everything you trade, everything you ship, everything you move from the rich coreward worlds out to the frontier, it all has to pass through that one dark channel. We are aware of the geography of our own civilization, said Asenth, but the warmth had not returned to the presence. It hovered, gold and violet, very still. Then you're aware, Maya said, that the crossing takes 41 standard days at the best jump rating your ships can hold. 41 days in the dark with no world to resupply at, no port to shelter in if something goes wrong. And you're aware that the whole crossing depends on the beacon chain. The string of navigation relays your ancestors sank into the dust 10,000 years ago, that tell a ship where it is and which way the safe channel runs. Without the beacons, the Weald is unnavigable. A ship that loses the chain doesn't just get lost. It falls into the wreck fields or drifts past the safe channel into the deep dust where the jump drives don't hold, and it's gone. 41 days from anywhere. No one comes back. She was quoting the Conquered's own records again, and everyone in the room knew it, and this time no one called it a clever trick. The beacon chain, Maya said, is maintained by the Asue. Under a grant of stewardship the Council awarded 11,000 years ago when the Asue were recognized. It's your oldest privilege, High Arbiter. It's the reason your one ragged world grew into the silent claim across the coreward dark. Whoever holds the beacons holds the throat of the conquered, and the Asue have held them since before most of the species in this room had writing. This is well known, Velsoon said. The Arbiter's voice was very controlled now, too controlled. You have read a great deal, child, you have understood the shape of it. But knowing where a thing keeps its weight is not the same as being able to move it. You said as much yourself. The beacons are ours by grant, defended by our fleets, maintained by our engineers. What of it? What has any of this to do with the recognition of Earth? Because the beacon chain is failing, Maya said. The room did not move. That was the thing she would remember afterward, that the room did not move at all. 406 delegates, and not one of them so much as breathed, and the not moving was louder than any gasp could have been. That is a serious accusation, Asenth said softly. It's not an accusation. It's an observation. Maya tapped the black tablet, and the air above the plinth filled with a slow-turning map, the Weald, rendered in threads of pale light, the beacon chain a string of 900 glowing points marching through the dark. These are the beacons. Their positions and their signal strengths are public data. Any ship that crosses records them and files them with the transit authority, and the transit authority publishes them, because your civilization believes in the free exchange of navigation data. It's one of your oldest laws. I read all of it. 311 days is a long time. She moved her hand, and along the string of 900 lights, a scattering of them began to pulse a deep, sullen red. 43 of these beacons have degraded past their safe tolerance in the last 200 years. Their signals are weakening. Their positions are drifting. 4 of them, the red points brightened, insistent, are dark. Completely dark. They've been dark for between 6 and 19 years, and the transit lanes have been quietly rerouted around them, and no ship that files a crossing report has flown near them long enough to notice. Beacons fail, Velsoon said. They are 10,000 years old. They are replaced on a schedule. This is maintenance, child, not catastrophe. Your map shows nothing but the ordinary wear of an ancient system, dressed up in red light to frighten a room that does not frighten. They're replaced on a schedule, Maya agreed. I read the schedule. It's public too. The Conquered publishes its stewardship fulfillment records, because transparency of stewardship is one of the conditions the Council attached to the grant 11,000 years ago. The Osue are required to file a replacement record every time they refurbish a beacon. It's the proof that you're holding up your end. It's the whole basis of your privilege. She paused. The Osue have not filed a replacement record in 140 years. Now the room moved. It was not a large movement, but it ran through the tiers like a current through water, a turning, a leaning, 400 delegations shifting all at once to look not at Maya, but at the highest bench, at the 9, at the pale segmented form of High Arbiter Velsoon. The filings continued, Maya said, into that turning. I want to be clear about that. There are replacement records in the archive for every one of the last 140 years. I read them. They're detailed. They list the beacon, the crew, the parts, the completion date. They're perfect. She let the word sit. That's the problem. They're perfect. Every year for 140 years, the exact same number of beacons refurbished, the exact same crew rotations, the parts drawn from a supply depot whose own inventory records, also public, also filed by the Osue, show that it stopped receiving shipments of beacon core material 141 years ago. The filings say you've been refurbishing beacons with a supply chain that ran dry before I was born. The records don't match each other. One of them is a lie. I don't think it's the empty depot. The silence had teeth now. You have been busy, Asenth said. The presence had gone very cold and very still, and it was no longer looking at Maya. It was looking at the High Arbiter. All of them were. Because Asenth of the Thren Compact commanded 900 worlds, and every one of them was core ward, and every ounce of trade that flowed from them to the outer markets, the trade that was the entire basis of the Thren Compact's wealth and the entire basis of Asenth's seat in this hall, crossed the Weald. On the beacon chain, the failing beacon chain, and Asenth had not known. None of them had known. That was what the turning meant. In a room built to make small things smaller, in a civilization that measured everything by weight, a 19-year-old with a satchel had just told 406 of the galaxy's great powers a thing about their own throat that not one of them had noticed, because they had been too large and too old and too certain to go looking through the boring public records that a bored child on a long crossing had read end to end. Explain, said a new voice. It came from the second seat on the high bench, Counselor Audra of the Iller, whose species had never spoken to Maya at all, whose skin still rippled faintly with the light of the earlier mockery, but who was not mocking now. Explain the significance, applicant, plainly. This council does not accept the theater of alarm. If you are telling us the beacon chain is failing, tell us what it means, in terms we can measure, and tell us how you claim to know it better than the stewards who tend it. This was the moment. Maya felt it arrive the way you feel the top of a long climb, the ground leveling under you, the air thinning, the whole vista opening up. Okonkwo had drilled her for this moment through 100 cold ship nights. Do not gloat. Do not win the small victory of the room surprise. The surprise is nothing. The surprise fades. What you do in the next minute is the only thing they will remember. I'll tell you plainly, Maya said. She turned off the red lights. She let the map hang there, quiet, 900 points of pale steady gold, the way the conquered had always imagined it. The beacon chain is not going to fail all at once. It's going to fail the way old things fail, slowly, and then suddenly. Right now, 43 weak beacons and 4 dark ones are survivable, because the safe channel is wide and your pilots route around the bad stretches. But every beacon that dies makes the safe channel narrower, and a narrower channel means more traffic squeezed through less space, and more traffic through less space means the drift errors compound faster, and compounding drift kills beacons faster still. It's a slope. Your own transit density records, public filed, unread, show the slope steepening for the last 40 years. I ran the curve. She looked up at the high bench. In approximately 11 years on current trend, the safe channel through the Weald closes. Not narrows, closes. And on that day, the coreward reaches and the outer world stop being one civilization, because the throat between them shuts and nothing you have. No fleet, no treaty metal, no weight of 900 worlds, reopens a beacon chain fast enough to matter. It took your ancestors 400 years to sink the chain the first time. You'd be doing it blind in the dark in the wreck fields with a war on. A war, Eudra said sharply. You said a war. Why a war? 'Cause the day the Weald closes, Maya said. The outer worlds are cut off from the coreward markets they depend on to survive, and the coreward worlds are cut off from the outer resources they depend on to stay rich, and every one of the 7,000 will reach the same conclusion at the same moment, that whoever controls the beacons controls whether the conquered lives or dies. And the beacons, she looked deliberately at the pale form of Vel Soon, belong to the Osue, by grant, defended by their fleets. A grant everyone in this room will suddenly want revoked or seized or held for themselves. She let the map turn. You have a civilization held together by a single failing thread, and the thread is owned by one player, and the moment everyone realizes the thread is failing, they'll go to war over who gets to hold what's left of it. That's not poetry, counselor. That's the curve. I ran it 11 times. It doesn't bend. For a long moment, no one in the Hall of Concordance said anything at all. Then Vel soon spoke, and the dry river voice had lost its smoothness entirely. The Osue, the High Arbiter said, have tended the beacons for 11,000 years. If there is a failure in the chain, it is a matter for the stewards to address in the steward's own time, by the steward's own means. It is not a matter for a recognition petition. It is certainly not a matter for the outer species to be alarmed over on the word of a child, Maya said. You've said that a lot, High Arbiter. I want you to notice something. She gestured at the galleries, at the 400 delegations turned toward the high bench, at the cold gold and violet stillness of Asanth, at the sharp attention of Eudra. You're the only one still saying it. She had not raised her voice. That was the thing Okonkwo had told her mattered most, and she had held to it. In a room of powers, the one who shouts is the one who is afraid. Maya had watched the recordings of 100 failed petitions on the long crossing, the desperate applicants who wept, who threatened, who begged, who let the room's contempt push them into loudness, and every one of them had lost the moment their voice climbed. The conquered did not fear volume. The conquered fed on it. So Maya kept her voice low and level and let the facts carry their own weight, because for the first time in the history of humanity's dealings with the 7,000 worlds, the facts had weight, not the weight of worlds or fleets, the weight of a thread pulled taut, and the small cold sound of it beginning to fray, in a silence where everyone could finally hear it. I don't have an army, Maya said. I've never pretended to. I have 12 worlds and 1 ship and a satchel, and the High Arbiter is right that on your scales, that's nothing. But I've spent 311 days learning something about the conquered that the conquered seems to have forgotten about itself. She looked slowly around the tiers. You are enormous, and you are old, and every one of you rose to your seat in this hall by being enormous and old, by being too big to push and too ancient to surprise. And somewhere along the way, all of you, every species in this room, stopped checking the small things. You stopped reading your own boring records. You stopped counting your own beacons. You built a civilization the size of a third of the sky, and you left the maintenance logs unread, because who would ever read them? Who would ever be small enough and desperate enough, and have 311 days of nothing to do, but a species that came here begging? She rested both hands on the black tablet. We read them, with the small door you never guarded, and I'm standing on it. Asanth of the Thren Compact drifted, slowly, a full meter down the tier toward Maya, and the presence that turned on her now was not warm, and it was not cruel. It was the naked, calculating attention of a power that has just discovered a variable it did not have in its equations. What do you want? Asanth said. It was not a question. It was the sound of a negotiation beginning. And High Arbiter Vel soon, at the center of the high bench, went very still. the stillness of a creature that has held one privilege for 11,000 years and has just felt, for the first time, a small cold hand close around it. "What do I want?" Maya repeated. She did not answer at once. She had learned from Okonkwo and from the long recordings that the space after a powerful being asks you what you want is the most valuable space in any room, and you do not fill it too quickly. "First, I want to correct something. You think I came here to trade this. You think I'm going to tell you I'll stay quiet about the beacons if you grant Earth recognition. That's how leverage works in this room. You find the other player's throat, and you squeeze, and you name your price." She shook her head slowly. "That's not why I'm here. I want you to understand that because everything I say next depends on you understanding it. I'm not threatening the conquered. If I wanted to threaten you, I wouldn't have told you the beacons were failing. I'd have gone home and told Earth, and we'd have made our own quiet preparations for the day the Weald closes, stockpiled, fortified, positioned our 12 small worlds to survive a war between giants that we didn't start. That would have been the smart, cold, self-interested thing to do, and I'll be honest, High Arbiter, some very serious people on Earth argued for exactly that. They said, let them fall. They mocked us for 10,000 years before they ever heard our name. Let the great conquered choke on its own neglect, and let humanity inherit whatever crawls out of the wreckage." The room was utterly silent. "I told them no," Maya said. "I told them that's not who we're going to be. Because here's the thing the conquered never understood about the small door, the reason you left it unguarded. You assumed that anyone small enough to fit through it would be too weak to matter, or too bitter to help. You built your whole civilization on the idea that power only comes in one size, and you're about to find out you were wrong about that in the most important way there is." She lifted her chin. "I didn't come here to squeeze your throat. I came here to save it. And I came here to do it in front of all 406 of you, in the open, with the recording crystals on, so that not one power in this room can ever pretend humanity did anything but tell the truth and offer help when we owed you nothing but grievance." "Save it how?" Eudra said. The Iller counselor was leaning forward now, skin gone smooth and dark with concentration. "You have told us the chain is failing. You have told us the failure is hidden. If the stewards cannot fix it in 11 years with the resources of an 11,000-year privilege, how does a species of 12 worlds propose to fix it at all?" "I don't propose to fix it," Maya said. "I propose to tell you how to fix it and then get out of your way, because you can fix it. That's the part that should terrify you and relieve you in the same breath, Counselor. The Weald is not broken beyond saving. It's broken because no one was looking. The 43 weak beacons haven't failed. They've drifted, and a drifted beacon can be re-anchored in days, not decades, if you know which ones and where they've gone. The 4 dark beacons are the hard part. Those need full replacement, real beacon core material, and yes, that supply chain has been dry for 140 years, and yes, someone is going to have to answer for why." She did not look at Vel soon when she said it. She didn't have to. But the core material isn't gone from the galaxy. It's just gone from the Asue depot, and I know where there's more of it. A lot more. Enough to rebuild the entire chain twice over. "Where?" said 3 voices at once, Asenth, Eudra, and a counselor Maya hadn't heard speak before, a heavy segmented being from the far end of the high bench. "That's the second thing I want," Maya said. And she smiled. The first time she had allowed herself to, and it was a small, tired, entirely human smile, the smile of someone who has climbed a very long way and can finally see the far side. "You called us the hopeful," she said to Asenth. "You said we come and go and were forgotten in a generation. You said the conquered recognizes weight and not poetry. So here's my petition, and it's not poetry, it's the coldest thing I've said all day." She spread her hands. "The beacon core material is in the outer dark. In the wreck fields at the edge of the Weald, and in the dead systems beyond them. In 100 places your survey ship stopped mapping 10,000 years ago, because those regions were too small and too poor and too far from the forward markets to be worth a great power's attention. Places exactly the size that a great power learns not to look at. Places, she paused, that a species of 12 small worlds has spent the last 60 years quietly mapping, because when you're small, you go where the giants won't, and you learn to see value in the things they've thrown away. Understanding moved across the room like a tide coming in. Humanity knows where the core material is, Maya said, because humanity has been living in the parts of the galaxy the conquered decided weren't worth living in. We didn't find it looking for leverage. We found it looking for a home in the only regions that weren't already claimed by something 11,000 years old. And now the conquered needs exactly what's buried in exactly the places only we know how to reach. She let it land. You need us, not because we're weighty. Because we went where you were too big to bother going and we saw what you were too proud to look for. That's the leverage, high arbiter, not a threat, a key, to a door you didn't know you'd locked yourself out of. Vel soon said nothing. The high arbiter's black eyes had not left Maya's face for a long time now, and there was something new in them. Not contempt, and not fear, but the terrible arithmetic of a being who has spent 11,000 years being the largest thing in every room, recalculating. You would sell us the material, Asenth said. The presence had gone entirely to business now, warm falseness burned away, leaving something almost respectful in its coldness. Name the price. Worlds, transit rights, a seat. No, Maya said. No. I won't sell you the material. Earth won't sell you the material. She looked slowly around the tiers at all 406 of them, and her voice was very clear. Because the moment we sell it to you, we're a resource. We're a mine you visit, a vein you tap, a small people who own something you want, and you all know exactly what the conquered does to small people who own something the great powers want. You take it. Maybe you pay for it first for a while, but you take it because you're enormous and we're not, and weight always finds a way to move the small thing off the thing it wants. I've read your history. It's very consistent. Then what? Eudra said, and there was an edge in the Iller's voice that was almost desperation now, because Maya had shown them the cliff and the rope in the same breath and was now holding the rope just out of reach. If you will not sell it and you will not trade it, what do you propose? You said you came to help. You said you came to save the throat of the conquered. A moment ago you offered us the key. Now you close your hand. Which is it, applicant? What do you want? Maya Renner stood on the black disk at the bottom of the great throat of a room, 406 powers hanging on her silence, the map of the failing wheel turning slow and gold above her head, and she gave them her answer. She gave them 3 words. Recognize us first. The words fell into the hall of concordance and did not echo. That was the strange thing, that a room built to make small sounds smaller and grand sounds grander took those 3 quiet words and simply held them, whole in the air, the way still water holds a stone before it sinks. Recognize us first. 3 words, and Maya watched them travel through 406 minds, and she watched, in real time, the entire power dynamic of the room invert. Because they understood, all of them, at once, what she had done. She had not asked to sell them the beacon core. A seller can be robbed. She had not asked to trade it for recognition. A trade can be reneged on the moment the goods are delivered, and every power in that room had reneged on 100 such trades and would have reneged on this one before the ink was dry. She had not threatened to withhold it. A threat gives the great powers a target, an enemy, a reason to combine against the small thing and simply take what it guards. She had asked them to recognize Earth first, before the material, before the maps, before a single dark beacon was relit. And they saw, all 406 of them in the same cold instant. Why, that changed everything. Because a recognized species could not be robbed. That was the entire point of recognition, the thing Maya had defined for them at the very start of the session, when they were still laughing. Recognition means our worlds cannot be claimed by prior right of survey. It means our ships may pass the Weald without tariff of flesh or fleet. It means that when a human is wronged beyond the conquered's border, there is a law that was wronged with them. She had told them exactly what recognition was in the first minute, and they had heard it as a child's poetry, and now they understood it had been the load-bearing wall of the entire structure she had been building all along. If they recognized Earth first, then the beacon core in the outer dark belonged to a conquered species, with full rights of claim and the protection of conquered law. To take it by force would be to break the law that bound the 7,000 together, the same law that let Asenth's 900 worlds trust that the Thren Compact's holdings would be respected, the same law that let the Iller sleep at night beside neighbors 10 times their size. Break it for humanity, and you announce to the entire conquered that recognition meant nothing, that any power could take from any weaker one, that the law was a fiction. And a conquered in which the law was a fiction was a conquered already at the war Maya had warned them of. They would tear each other apart within a generation, beacon or no beacon. So they could not take it. If they recognized her first, they were bound, by their own most sacred principle, to buy what humanity chose to sell, at the price humanity chose to name forever. She had not squeezed their throat. She had made herself impossible to rob, and then offered them their own lives at a fair price. And she had done it so that the only way to cheat her was to destroy the very thing that made them a civilization instead of a war. Recognize us first, Maya said again, gently into the ringing quiet. Then we'll talk about the Weald, not as a resource you've cornered. As a member of the conquered you saved, doing what members do. I'll give you the maps, High Arbiter, every one of them. The wreck fields, the dead systems, the core veins we've spent 60 years charting in the dark. I'll give you the re-anchoring solutions for all 43 drifted beacons. My people ran them, they're good, they'll hold. I'll help you relight the 4 that died. Humanity will pull the conquered back from the cliff it doesn't even know it's standing on, and we'll do it as equals under law, or we won't do it at all. She let her hands fall open at her sides. That's the petition. That's the whole petition. Recognize us first. For a long moment, the only movement in the Hall of Concordance was the slow turning of the map above Maya's head. 900 points of light. 43 of them faded to drift. 4 of them already dark. All of them suddenly, urgently precious. Then Asenth of the Thren Compact spoke, and the presence had changed once more. The gold and violet mist had gone quiet and deep, and when it turned toward the high bench, toward the 9, toward the pale, still form of the High Arbiter, it was no longer amused, no longer cold, no longer calculating. It was afraid, and it had decided to stop being afraid the only way a power like Asenth knew how, by moving first. High Arbiter, Asenth said, the Thren Compact moves that the Council recognize the human species and the world called Earth, effective immediately with all rights of a conquered people. And I would remind the Council, the presence drifted, deliberately, to face the whole assembly, that 900 of my worlds depend on the throat this child has just shown us is failing. The Compact will not wait 11 years to learn whether the stewards can save it in their own time, by their own means. The Compact votes to recognize, and the Compact would very much like to know who among the 7,000 votes to let the Weald close. The threat in it was exquisite, and it was not aimed at Maya. It was aimed at Valsoon. High Arbiter Valsoon of the Asue did not move for a long time. Maya watched the Arbiter and understood, with a clarity that was almost pity, exactly what was happening on that high gold bench. Valsoon had walked into this session the master of the room, 11,000 years of privilege. The oldest seat, the oldest grant, the stewardship of the throat of the whole conquered. And in the space of a single petition, a 19-year-old with a satchel had turned every one of those advantages into a noose. The beacon chain, the source of all Asue power, was failing. The failure had been hidden, and the hiding was documented in the conquered's own public records, in filings the Asue themselves had submitted. 140 years of falsified stewardship. And now Asanth, whose 900 worlds had just discovered their lifeline was fraying, was standing in the open hall demanding to know who would vote to let it fray further. Velsoon could fight this. Maya could see the arbiter weighing it. The Osaway fleets defended the beacon chain. The Osaway could refuse the human maps, refuse the re-anchoring solutions, insist the stewards would handle the failure in their own time, dare the conquered to strip an 11,000-year grant on the word of an applicant child. The arbiter had the standing to try it. For 11,000 years, standing had been enough. But Maya had built the room so that standing was not enough anymore. She had put the facts in the open with the crystals recording. She had made herself impossible to rob. And she had handed Asanth, the second hungriest power in the room, the one with the most to lose and the most to gain, a reason and a weapon to move against the Osaway in the same breath. If Velsoon fought now, the arbiter would not be fighting a child. The arbiter would be fighting Asanth, and the Iller, and every one of the 400 delegations whose trade crossed the failing Weald, all of whom had just watched the Osaway's oldest privilege revealed as 140 years of quiet fraud. The math had changed, and Velsoon, whatever else 11,000 years had made of the Osaway, had not survived that long by failing to recognize when the math had changed. "The council," Velsoon said at last, and the dry river voice was very careful now, each word set down like a foot on ice, "will note the Thren Compact's motion." "The council will do more than note it," said Eudra of the Iller. The councillor rose, actually rose, unfolding upward from the high bench, a thing Maya had read that the Iller did only to mark the gravest business. The Iller second the motion, and the Iller add a second motion, to be taken up the moment the first is resolved, that this council open a formal inquiry into the stewardship of the beacon chain, and into the filings of the last 140 years, and into the depot inventories that this applicant has placed before us. The material she has shown is public. It has always been public. It requires only that the council do the thing the council has apparently not done in 140 years. The Iller's skin flushed a deep, resonant amber. Read its own records. Something moved through the galleries then, a sound Maya had not heard from them before. It took her a moment to place it, because she had come into this room braced for contempt and had never once, in 311 days of preparation, let herself imagine she might hear this instead. It was assent. 400 delegations shifting toward her, not away, not in the leaning pleasure of the mockery, but toward, the way a room turns toward the one person in it who has just told the truth. "The stewardship of the Osaway," Velsoon began, and there was the ghost of the old command in it, the reflex of 11,000 years, "is not a matter to be." "High Arbiter," the heavy segmented counselor from the far end of the bench spoke for the first time, in a voice like grinding stone. This was Counselor Rugg of the Bureau, Maya knew, a species older even than the Osaway, who held no fleets and no trade lanes and spoke perhaps twice in a standard year, and whose rare words carried a weight in this room that even Velsoon could not ignore. "The child has not accused you. Mark that. She has accused no one. She placed the records before us and let them speak, and the records say what they say. If the Osaway have tended the chain faithfully, the inquiry will show it, and the child's alarm will have cost you nothing but an afternoon. If the Osaway have not," the great segmented head turned, slowly, toward Velsoon, "then the inquiry will show that too. And it is better, old friend, that it be shown here in the open by a council doing its duty, than that it be shown 11 years from now by a Weald gone dark and a war already burning. The child has done you a kindness. You are simply too proud in this moment to feel it." The silence after Rugg spoke was the silence of a verdict. Velsoon looked for the last time at Maya Renner, 19 years old, in an ill-fitting coat, one hand resting on a cheap black tablet, standing on the plinth at the bottom of the room where an hour ago the whole Concord had gathered to watch her weep. She had not wept. The council, Vel soon said, and the words came slowly, and they came as a surrender dressed in the last dignity available to a thing that had ruled for 11,000 years, recognizes the human species and the world called Earth, and the 11 colonies grown from it as a people of the conquered with all rights of trade, transit, and protection thereto appurtening. A pause. The black eyes did not leave her. The motion carries. The inquiry is opened. And the council, the smallest hesitation, thanks the delegate of Earth for bringing this matter before it. The delegate of Earth. Not the applicant, not the child, not the hopeful. The delegate. Maya Renner closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, and in that second she was not in the Hall of Concordance at all. She was back on the courier ship, 311 days out, in the small cold cabin where Okonkwo's recorded voice had drilled her through the long dark. You will get one moment, the old woman had said, when the room turns. It will feel like the end. It is not the end. It is the most dangerous moment in the whole encounter, because in that moment you will want to be proud, and pride is how they take it all back. When the room turns, Maya, you make yourself small again. Not weak, small. You give them the wind to swallow. You make it their idea. A great power can forgive being beaten by a child. It can never forgive being humiliated by one. Maya opened her eyes. Thank you, High Arbiter, she said, and I want the record to show something before the council moves on. She looked up at the 9 and then out at the 400, and she pitched her voice low and even and entirely without triumph. I didn't find this because humanity is clever. I want to be honest about that. We're not smarter than the Asue. No one alive is older or wiser than the Asue. I found it because we're small and we're new, and small new things have to read everything because we can't afford to miss anything. That's not a virtue. It's a fear. It's the fear of a people who have been alone a long time. She let it settle. The Asue tended this chain for 11,000 years, and it held for 11,000 years, and if it drifted at the end, that's not the failure of a steward. That's the weight of 10,000 years pressing on 10,000-year-old machines. Any of us would have missed it. I only caught it because catching it was the only thing I had to offer a room that had every reason to throw me out. She inclined her head toward Vel soon, and she meant it. The conquered doesn't owe humanity for this. Humanity owes the conquered for 11,000 years of a road we got to use for free the moment you let us in. Let's fix the road together. That's all I came to say. She had handed Vel soon the exit. She watched the Arbiter take it, watched 11,000 years of pride reach out and close around the thing she had offered, the story in which the Asue were not frauds exposed by a child but ancient stewards worn down by time and graciously assisted by a promising new people. It was not the true story. Maya knew the true story, and the records knew it, and the inquiry would find it. But the true story could wait for the inquiry. In this room, in this moment, she gave the great power a version it could live inside, and by giving it, she made an enemy into something that was not yet a friend but was no longer reaching for her throat. The delegate of Earth is generous, Vel soon said quietly, and there was something in the dry voice now that might, in 11,000 more years, learn to become respect. The council will remember it. It should have ended there. In every version Maya had rehearsed on the crossing, it ended there, recognition won, the room turned, the exit handed to the loser, the small door held. But the conquered was old, and the old have long reflexes, and there was one power in the Hall of Concordance that had not yet moved, and that power was about to remind Maya Renner that winning the room was not the same as winning the war. Ascent of the Thren Compact drifted slowly back up the tier to its seat, and as it went, the gold and violet presence turned once more toward the plinth, toward Maya, and it spoke in a voice she had not heard it use before. Low, private, pitched to carry to her and to the crystals but not quite to the far galleries. You have won something today, delegate, Ascent said. More than you know. Recognition, yes, but something else. You have made 400 powers understand all at once that they cannot see their own weaknesses and that the ones who can see them are the small ones they have spent an eternity ignoring. The presence pulsed, thoughtful. That understanding does not go away when this session ends. It will follow you home. Some in this room will thank you for it. And some, delegate, some will decide that a small thing which can see the great powers' throats is a small thing that must never be allowed to grow large enough to squeeze one. A pause. You have made humanity valuable today. You have also made it dangerous. Those are the same thing in this room, and both of them are watched. Maya met the presence's regard steadily. I know, she said. Do you? I've read your history, Maya said, all of it. I know what the conquered does to the small things that see too clearly. I knew before I came in. She rested her hand on the black tablet one more time. That's why I did it in the open, Delegate Asenth, with the crystals on, in front of all 406 of you. Because a secret that only you and I share is a secret you'd have every reason to bury me over. But a truth that 400 powers heard at once and voted on and opened an inquiry into, that truth doesn't die when I die. You can't bury it by burying me. You'd only be burying the delegate who warned you, and every power in this room would know it, and then who would ever bring you the next warning? She almost smiled. I didn't just make humanity valuable and dangerous. I made humanity necessary. The species that reads the records. The small door you finally want guarded because you've realized you can't guard it yourselves. That's harder to kill than a child on a plinth. I made sure of it before I opened my satchel. For a long moment, Asenth of the Thren Compact regarded the human delegate in silence. Then the presence did something that no Thren had done in the Hall of Concordance in living memory, a gesture Maya had read about in the archives and never expected to see turned toward her. It dimmed, briefly, its whole shifting envelope of gold and violet going low and dark, and then brightening again. A bow, the bow of one power to another, the bow you gave an equal. Welcome to the conquered, delegate of Earth, Asenth said. Try to live long enough to enjoy it. The lower chamber of the conquered was nothing like the great hall above it. Where the Hall of Concordance had been built to make small things smaller, the Stewardship Inquiry Chamber had been built, 10,000 years ago, to make lies impossible. It was a plain round room of gray stone, no galleries, no tiers, no theater, just a ring of hard benches around a central well where the records could be summoned into the air and turned and examined by anyone with the standing to look. There was no place to hide in it, and no advantage of height, and no crowd to lean into. The conquered had built exactly one room in which weight did not matter, and it had buried it under the room where weight mattered most. And Maya thought that told you almost everything you needed to know about the people who had built both. She had won the Great Hall by refusing to enter the corridor. She could not refuse the inquiry. But she had spent 311 days learning that the inquiry chamber, precisely because it was the one room where weight did not matter, was the one room in the whole conquered where a small thing with the truth on its side could not lose. Counselor Audra of the Iller presided, because the Iller had opened the inquiry, and Counselor Rugg of the Bureau sat as witness, because the Bureau had never in 10,000 years told a lie in that chamber, and their presence was said to make lying harder for everyone else. Velsoon of the Ossuwe sat as the accused steward, not in disgrace, not yet, but in the plain hard seat where the accused sat, and Maya understood what it had cost 11,000 years of pride to lower itself onto that bench, and she was careful, very careful, to give the arbiter no reason to regret it. Delegate of Earth, Audra said, you will present the human survey data now, under the terms entered into the record above, that humanity presents as steward of the outer weald, and that the data remains humanity's, held in stewardship, not surrendered as evidence. Do you consent to present under these terms? I consent, Maya said, and she reached into her satchel and she gave them everything. She had worried on the long crossing about this moment more than any other, more than the mockery, more than the vote, because the maps were the only thing humanity had. 60 years of work, thousands of quiet survey runs into the dark the giants wouldn't enter, the entire patient inheritance of a people who had learned to find value in what others discarded. And here she was, opening the satchel and pouring it into the central well of a conquered chamber, watching 60 years of humanity's only leverage bloom into the air, where 4 of the oldest powers in the galaxy could see all of it at once. But she had made the terms first. That was the whole of it. She had won the chair before she opened the satchel, and so what bloomed in the well was not a resource being surrendered but a steward doing its duty, and the difference between those two things was the difference between humanity's whole future and its slow, forgotten death, and it lived entirely in the order in which two things had happened. Recognize us first. Everything downstream of those 3 words was safe. Everything upstream of them would have been theft. The data turned in the well, vast and intricate. The wreck fields charted down to the individual hulls, the dead systems with their buried core veins marked in threads of human notation, the re-anchoring solutions for all 43 drifted beacons worked out to a precision that made even Rug of the Barrow lean forward and go still. "This is thorough," Eudra said, and there was wonder under the words. "This is more than thorough. Delegate, your people have been mapping the outer dark for 60 years. Why? You could not have known the beacon chain was failing 60 years ago. What were you looking for out there in the regions we abandoned?" Maya was quiet for a moment. "A home," she said, "just a home. We were recognized by no one and protected by no law, and every good region of the galaxy was claimed by something 11,000 years old, and so we went where the claims ran out. We mapped the dark because the dark was the only place that would have us. We got very, very good at seeing value in the places the great powers threw away, because the places the great powers threw away were the only places we were allowed to look." She gestured at the turning data. "We didn't build this to save the conquered, counselor. We built it to survive being ignored by the conquered. It just turned out that the two things were the same map. That's the part I keep thinking about. You spent 11,000 years ignoring us, and in the ignoring you accidentally made us into the one people who knew how to save you. The small door you never guarded and the key that fit it were the same thing. You made both of them yourselves. You made them by looking away." Rug of the Barrow spoke then, in the grinding stone voice that the chamber had been built to make honest. "The child speaks a hard truth plainly," Rug said, "and I have heard enough plain truths in this room over 10,000 years to know the sound of one. Mark it, Council. We did not lose the beacon chain because the Asue are wicked. We lost it because we are old and the old stop looking, and a civilization that stops looking at its own foundations is a civilization already falling, however slowly, however grandly. This child did not defeat us. She woke us. There is a difference, and the difference is the only thing that will save us, and I would have us remember that when the inquiry grows angry, as inquiries do, and begins to hunt for someone to punish instead of something to fix." The great segmented head turned to Vel soon. "The Asue failed. The Asue will answer for it. But the failure the Asue answer for is the failure of every power in this room, worn thin over 11,000 years and simply showing first in the oldest steward's hands. Judge accordingly. Judge as beings who know their own foundations, are no less unread than the Asues were." The chamber was silent for a long time after that. And Maya Renner, standing beside the well where 60 years of humanity's patient labor turned in the air, understood that she had done something in this plain gray room that she had not fully planned and could not fully undo. She had not just saved the Wield. She had shown the 4 oldest powers in the galaxy a mirror, and in the mirror they had seen the one thing 11,000 years of wait had taught them never to look for, their own blindness. Some of them would hate her for the mirror. Asenth had warned her of that. But some of them, Rug, and perhaps Eudra, and perhaps, in time, even Vel soon, would understand that the mirror was the truest gift a small clear-eyed thing could give a great blind one, and that a conquered which learned to look again might last another 11,000 years, and that it would owe that survival to the day it gathered 400 powers to watch a child weep, and the child had read the records instead. "The inquiry will continue," Eudra said at last. "It will run for years. It will be hard, and it will be thorough, and the delegate of Earth will be called to it again and again, because the delegate of Earth is now the steward whose records the inquiry must check against the Osuways forever." The Iller's amber deepened. "That is the burden you asked for, delegate. You asked to become the people who read the records. The conquered has granted it. I hope, for your sake and ours, that your people never grow tired of reading." "We won't," Maya said. And she meant it, and it was true, and it was the truest thing she had said in the whole long day, because a people who had been alone for 10,000 years and had survived it by refusing to miss anything did not grow tired of paying attention. Attention was not a chore to them. It was the shape of their hope. It was the one inheritance they had carried out of every hard winter, the thing that had kept them alive when they were small and cold and outmatched, and told, over and over, that the thing in front of them was too big to beat. They had never once believed it. They were not going to start now. The session did not end when the vote carried. Sessions of the conquered never simply ended. They dissolved slowly into 100 smaller currents, delegations peeling away to their private chambers to reckon with what they had witnessed. But Maya was not permitted to peel away with them. Recognition was a status. It was not yet a settlement. And the beacon chain was still failing, whatever the crystals had recorded, and the inquiry Eudra had opened was already sending its first quiet tendrils out into the archives, and the 400 powers who had turned toward her an hour ago now wanted, all at once and separately, to know precisely what she had, and what it would cost them, and whether they could get it without her. That was the war Asenth had warned her about. It began before she had left the plinth. A young attendant of the Iller, young for an Iller meant something like 400 years, Maya reminded herself, drifted down to the black disk and informed her, with elaborate courtesy, that the council requested the delegate of Earth attend an extraordinary sitting of the stewardship inquiry, immediately in the lower chamber, to present the human survey data on which she had based her alarm. Maya understood the trap in it at once. Present the data, all of it. The rec field maps, the dead system charts, the core vein locations humanity had spent 60 years assembling in the dark. Hand it to the inquiry, and the inquiry would enter it into the conquered record. And once it was in the conquered record, it was no longer humanity's. It was evidence, public filed, the property of the very transparency laws Maya had used to hang the Osuway. The great powers would have the maps. And a recognized species that had already given away the only thing that made it necessary was a recognized species that could be quietly starved of relevance until it was small again, and forgotten, exactly as Asenth had first promised. They had turned her own weapon around in the space of an hour. The openness that had protected her had become the lever they meant to use to empty her hands. Okonkwo's voice, from 311 days back, "They will not beat you in the room. If they cannot beat you in the room, they will try to beat you in the corridor. The corridor is where the great powers do their real work. Never let them get you into the corridor alone." "I would be honored to attend the inquiry," Maya said to the Iller attendant, loudly enough for the crystals, "and to present humanity's data to the council in full." She paused and pitched the next part just as loudly. "Once the terms of humanity's stewardship in the Weald have been entered into the record. Since the delegate of Earth is now a recognized member of the conquered, and the beacon core lies in regions humanity surveyed and holds by right of first mapping under conquered law, I assume the council will wish to formalize the human role in the repair before humanity presents proprietary survey data. The forms require it, I think. I read the forms." She smiled pleasantly. "I read all of them." The Iller attendant went very still, because Maya had, once again, refused to step into the corridor. She had taken the private request and answered it in the open, in front of the crystals, in front of the 400, and she had wrapped her refusal in the Concord's own procedure, so that to press her would be to press against the forms, and the forms were the one thing in the Hall of Concordance older and more immovable than the Asue. She would give them the data. Gladly. The moment the record showed, in ink that 400 powers had witnessed, that humanity was the steward of the repair, not the seller of the maps, not the resource tapped and discarded, but the steward, with a grant of its own, the way the Asue had held their grant for 11,000 years. She was not asking for the beacon chain. She was asking for a chair, a permanent one, load-bearing, written into the structure of the Concord so deeply that removing it would crack the wall, exactly the way the Asue's grant had made the Asue unremovable for 11,000 years. "That is a considerable request," said Eudra, who had descended from the high bench and now floated at the edge of the black disk, watching Maya with the amber intensity that had not left the iller since the vote. "A stewardship grant, of the same kind the Asue hold. You understand what you are asking. You are asking to become, in a single afternoon, what it took the Asue 11,000 years to be." "No," Maya said. "I'm asking humanity to earn what it took the Asue 11,000 years to earn, and to earn it the same way they did, by holding the throat of the conquered open when no one else could. The Asue got their grant because they had leverage the conquered needed and couldn't take. So do we. You said it yourself, Counselor, at the very start, through the High Arbiter's mouth. Leverage is the currency of this room. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking to be paid in the currency you told me was the only one you accept." She looked up at the high bench, at the pale, still form of Vel Soon. "And I'm asking to be paid it in front of everyone, so that no one ever has to wonder whether humanity earned its chair or begged for it." It was Vel Soon who answered. The High Arbiter had been silent through all of this, watching, and when the dry river voice came it was slow and considered and carried, for the first time in the entire session, no contempt in it at all. "There is a symmetry the delegate of Earth is too modest to name," Vel Soon said, "so I will name it since it is the Asue's to name." The segmented head turned, taking in the 400. 11,000 years ago, a young delegate of a single ragged world stood on that plinth, and the council of that age mocked them, and the delegate did not weep. They brought the council a thing it needed and could not take, and they asked in return not for tribute but for stewardship, for a chair that could not be removed. And the council of that age, in its wisdom or its exhaustion, granted it. That delegate's world was called Asu. That delegate's people are called the Asue. A long pause. "I have sat in this hall for a great many centuries, and I have watched a great many of the hopeful come and go, and I confess I had forgotten that the Asue were once hopeful too. The delegate of Earth read our archives and remembered it for me. I find I am not grateful to be reminded, but I am, perhaps, wiser for it." Vel Soon rose. It was the second time in the session an ancient power had risen, and this time the whole Hall of Concordance went silent to watch it, because the High Arbiter of the Asue did not rise. The High Arbiter was risen too. "The Asue," Vel Soon said, "hold the stewardship of the beacon chain by a grant 11,000 years old, and the delegate of Earth has shown this council, in the open, that we have not held it as faithfully as our grant required. The inquiry will judge how grave that failure is, and the Asue will accept its judgment, because a steward who will not accept judgment is no steward at all." The head bowed, fractionally. "But the wield is too great a throat for one hand, and it has been so for a long time, and our pride has cost the conquered dearly for pretending otherwise. Therefore the Asue move, not the Thren, not the Iller, but the Asue, who have the standing to move it and the shame to make it right, that this council establish a second stewardship of the wield, a stewardship of the outer dark, of the wreck fields and the dead systems and the core veins beyond the safe channel, a stewardship to be held by the people who mapped that dark when no one else would enter it." Vel Soon looked down at Maya. "A stewardship to be held by Earth. Let the ancient steward tend the channel, and the new steward tend the deep, and let the two of them keep the throat of the conquered open together. The Asue so move, and the Asue ask the delegate of Earth whether she will accept the weight of it. The weight of it, the word she had been mocked with an hour ago, turned now into an offering. Maya Renner stood very still. She thought, in that suspended moment, of the councils on Earth that had preceded the crossing, the ones where the serious cold people had argued to let the conquered fall and inherit the wreckage. She thought of Okonkwo, 40 years of gravel patience, who had trained her and then been judged too old and too heavy for this room, and who had chosen a 19-year-old cadet instead of going herself, and who had wept the night before Maya's ship left and pretended it was the dust in the docking bay. She thought of 12 small worlds. Alone for so long they had built an entire culture around the ache of it, sending their youngest and least weighty into the throat of a civilization that had every power to swallow her, not because they were sure she would win, but because they had run out of every other kind of hope and had, at the very bottom, only this one left, that being small and reading everything and refusing to accept what outmatched was supposed to mean might, just this once, be enough. It had been enough. On behalf of humanity, Maya said, and her voice did not shake, and she was fiercely, quietly glad of that. The delegate of Earth accepts the stewardship of the outer world, and humanity accepts it under the same law that binds every steward of the conquered, that a grant not held faithfully may be judged and stripped and given to another. We'll hold it faithfully. We'll read the records, every year, forever, a breath. It's the one thing we've always been good at. And the Hall of Concordance, the room built to make small things smaller, the room that had gathered 406 powers to watch a child weep, made a sound it had not made in living memory. It was the sound of assent, 400 delegations strong, and beneath it, threaded through it, faint and astonished and utterly human in its meaning even coming from 100 inhuman throats, it was something very close to applause. The couriers reached Earth long before Maya did. She was still 19 days out from the homeworld, still folded in the belly of the same ship that had carried her out, when the fastest of the message drones overtook her. A needle of conquered-built speed the Council had gifted the new steward, so that Earth would never again be 300 days from the room where its fate was decided. She watched the recordings it carried on the small screen in her cold cabin, the celebrations in the colony domes, the crowds in the old cities, the disbelief, and then the tears and then the roar. She watched a recording of Okonkwo, 40 years of gravel patience, standing in front of a wall of screens with her hand pressed over her mouth, saying nothing at all, because for once in her long life there was nothing that needed saying. Maya watched it alone, in the dark, and then she turned it off and sat with the quiet. She was not the same person who had walked into the Hall of Concordance. She understood that now. The girl who had crossed out from Earth had believed, in some untested corner of herself, that if she was clever enough and prepared enough and brave enough, the great powers would be moved by the rightness of her cause. She had learned on the black disk at the bottom of the throat that the great powers were moved by nothing but their own survival, and that the whole art of it, the whole terrible, beautiful art of being small in a room full of giants, was not to change what moved them, but to become, quietly, the thing their survival depended on. She had not softened the conquered's heart. The conquered did not have one. She had found the small door and stood on it, and made them understand that the door was load-bearing, and that she was the only one who knew how to keep it standing. That was not a comfortable thing to have learned at 19, but it was a true thing, and Maya had built her whole survival, out here in the dark, on the discipline of preferring true things to comfortable ones. It was the one thing her people had always been good at. There would be a next time. She knew that too. Ascent's warning had not been idle. Humanity was valuable now and dangerous now, and both of those things were watched. The inquiry into the Asue would run for years, and it would make the Asue grateful or vengeful or both, and Maya could not yet say which. The great powers who had bowed to her in the hall would spend the coming decades testing, quietly, whether the small door could be pried loose after all, whether the steward of the outer world could be starved, or absorbed, or simply outweighted until it grew forgetful and heavy and stopped reading the records. That was how the conquered worked. That was how it had always worked. Being recognized was not the end of the danger. It was only the beginning of a different, longer, more patient kind of danger, the kind that great old powers were very good at and small new peoples had to learn. Humanity would learn it. Maya was certain of that, sitting alone in the dark 19 days out. They would learn it the way they had learned everything else across 10,000 years of hard winters, by being the small thing in the room, and reading everything, and refusing, always refusing, to accept what outmatched was supposed to mean. The conquered had left one small door unguarded for 11,000 years, and humanity had walked through it. Now humanity would spend the next 11,000 years learning to guard doors of its own, and to find the small doors of others, and to be, in a galaxy of enormous ancient things, the people who saw clearly because they had never once been allowed to be careless. She thought of the 4 words the High Arbiter had used at the end, when the vote had carried and the room had turned. The delegate of Earth. And she thought of the 3 words she had given them, into the ringing quiet, that had turned the whole vast room over on its axis. 3 quiet words that had not been a threat or a plea or a trade, but something the conquered in 11,000 years of weight and pride had never learned to defend against, because it had never imagined a small thing could say them and make them stick. Recognize us first. She had said them low and level without triumph, exactly the way Okonkwo had taught her, and they had fallen into the hall of concordance and not echoed, and by the time they finished sinking, the newest and smallest species in the 7,000 worlds had a chair that could not be removed, a stewardship written into the load-bearing wall of the galaxy's oldest institution, and a name that 400 powers would not forget in a generation, or 100 generations, or however long it took the small door to become a great one. Maya Renner, 19 years old, steward of the outer world, delegate of Earth, sat alone in the dark of a courier ship 19 days from home, and let herself, at last, for exactly 1 second, smile. Then she reached into her satchel and drew out the black tablet and began, once more, to read the records, because the next room was already coming, somewhere out in the enormous patient dark, and humanity would meet it the only way it ever had. Small, awake, and impossible to surprise.